crisis social y climática de la región, a cargo del señor Patrick Karagasahan, Chief Operating Officer en Hábitat para la Humanidad Internacional, quien tras 25 años de liderazgo en organizaciones no gubernamentales y en el sector privado, hoy supervisa las operaciones de Hábitat para la Humanidad en más de 70 países. Es nativo de Sri Lanka y antes de llegar a Hábitat se desempeñó como CEO de Children Believe con sede en Toronto desde 2017. Anteriormente fue director de operaciones de Oxfam International y ocupó altos cargos en World Vision Canadá y Asia Oriental. Cuenta con un máster en Derechos Humanos por la Universidad de Londres y una licenciatura por la Universidad York de Toronto. Bienvenido, señor, y adelante. Welcome, sir.
Honorable guests, colleagues, friends, partners, once again, my apologies that you may have to either defer to translation or you just got to accept whatever I say in English. I cannot promise that the next time I visit either the region or this country that I'll be fluent in my Spanish. But this is what I can tell you. I need to do a better job to be at least to get to the basics so that I can do a better job at least greeting you in Spanish. So thank you for your patience. Friends, partners, guests, we have multiple sectors represented here. I have to confess that over the past couple of days, I've been both inspired but also humbled. I've been inspired because there's so much rich content, thought leadership, and significant change that this particular region, Latin America and the Caribbean, is leading. That's huge. I've been humbled because I've been compelled to have my own assumptions tested over the past 2 days. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a subject matter expert, but I've worked in the international development sector for the past several years, and I've been humbled, having lived and worked in different geographies, to always learn something new. And I told myself, coming here when my colleague, Ernesto Castro Garcia, our area vice president for Latin America and Caribbean, invited me to participate, saying that I'm going to adapt that posture to come and learn. And you taught me a lot. Yes, I have a few thoughts, a few things to share, but what I'm really hoping is what I'm about to share would not be based on what I know, but more in terms of collectively us coming to an understanding, to have a shared vision as to how we can co-create solutions to address some of the most complex problems that we face. But before I get there, I want to bring greetings from the Habitat for Humanity Network, particularly CEO Jonathan Reckford, who unfortunately is unable to be with us. But I also want to take this opportunity, colleagues, as opposed to waiting right until the end, to give a big round of applause to my colleagues, my team, from our Latin America and the Caribbean region. Can we just give them a big applause for putting this together? I was asked to share a few thoughts concerning the call to action for responding to what we consider social and climate crisis as it concerns housing. And this is what I would like to do over the next few minutes. I'd just like to pose a few guiding questions for us to collectively consider, not to respond to, but to collectively consider. The first question is, what are the responsibilities of the housing sector? And here I include the public sector, the private sector, the social, but also academics, banks, etc., towards solving the current climate and social crisis affecting this region. The second question that I would like to pose is why and how countries in the global south should engage in a more decisive way to implement and demand the housing and urban solutions that will help us to survive the climate crisis and deter the extinction that may befall us. The next question is, what are the most urgent actions that international actors, and that includes us, should prioritize to effectively address climate change and its impact, particularly on housing settlements? And the final piece is really both a mirror-holding exercise for us as Habitat for Humanity, but for us to collectively consider is, what is the position of Habitat for Humanity International regarding climate change? And some of the things that I would like to reflect on in the next few minutes, and I promise you it'll be just a few minutes, is the immensity of the climate crisis and the challenges that we have, and what it means for us to really transition to locality of housing. The importance of identifying the needs of the most vulnerable that I would pretty much say all of us are called to serve, especially people in informal settlements, but also elevating housing as the nexus of climate mitigation and adaptation. And finally, is a call to action. To take action locally, nationally, but also towards the global north. You know, over the past couple of days, I got to know some of you for the very first time, and I'm glad I did. And I talked about being humbled, about learning new things, is one of the things that you reminded me, and rightly so, of even as we talk global, but also to think local, but also to think regionally as well. So I want to talk about the region for at least 2 minutes. The global context you've already heard. As shocking as it may be, close to 2 billion people in this world don't have access to adequate housing. That's real. The global population, we are told, is about 8 billion. So it's about 25% of the global population that does not have access to adequate housing. But I want to bring it back to this region. According to the Inter-American Development Bank, the estimate is that, believe it or not, you know the numbers, just to remind us, 45% of the population in this region, and that includes the Caribbean, do not have a decent place to live. 45% is pretty close to half the population of this region. Let me talk about our host country, Colombia, for a moment. According to the most recent annual report from the National Administrative Department of Statistics, or DANE, this was published in 2021, we are told that the housing deficit affects or impacts 31% of households in this country. That's the reality. Yesterday, my colleague, Amanda Entrecan, talked about informal settlements and Habitat's global campaign called Home Equals. She talked about a number, a staggering number of 1 billion people who continue to live in informal settlements. That's real. But guess what? According to the United Nations, 95 million people in this region also live in informal settlements. That's real as well. And in Colombia, again, the host country, the United Nations estimates that almost 10% of the Colombian population resides in informal settlements. I want to quickly talk about climate change, to talk about the nexus between housing and climate change. You heard from one of our colleagues yesterday, and I know you know this as well, that Latin America and the Caribbean is the second most disaster-prone region in the world. If I may just give a couple of numbers or statistics. According to the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, it registered that there were 175 disasters in Latin America and the Caribbean between 2020 and 2022. That's a 2-year period. According to data from the Development Bank of Latin America, or CAF, This region apparently has 120 million people who live in marginal neighborhoods and communities. And again, according to the UN, we are told that since the year 2000, 152 million Latin Americans and Caribbeans have been affected by more than, guess how many? 1,200 disasters. Why am I sharing these numbers? It's not for the sake of sharing numbers, it's to give perspective. Because there is a cost attached to social and economic inaction. We've all talked about action, but there's a cost attached to inaction. And that's the reason why this discourse and this forum is important for us. I'm going to give you 6 headlines very quickly, and I'll try and do it in 2 to 3 minutes. The first one is displacement and migration. Many of you in the countries that you represent, you're facing this. You have to make choices as leaders based on climate change contributing to displacement and migration. The second one is housing vulnerability. We are housing actors. It has a direct bearing, inaction has a direct bearing if you are not willing to take on climate action when it comes to housing and settlements. And then, of course, there's health and well-being. If you look at some points of intersection with housing, climate change can and will and is affecting people's health and well-being. There's also an economic cost, an economic impact. But if that isn't bad enough, we keep talking about social inequality and inequity. And guess what? Inaction would contribute to further amplify, just not amplifying the issue, but to intensify the issue as well. And the last piece I would say is the social unrest. A lot of tension, a lot of stress, and it's happening in different parts of the world, but this region is not immune. So friends, can I ask you this question? Is this all gloom and doom? Or do we see, as we see the challenges, do we also see opportunities? I'm inclined to say, based on what I heard over the past couple of days, there are tremendous opportunities for us. And I would like to talk about it in the next 2 to 3 minutes. But before I do that, I just want to congratulate each of you for your strong leadership across sectors, public, private, civil society, international organizations. You've been doing this for the past several years. Just hearing the minister from Barbados talk about a small island state taking decisive action tells me there are possibilities. The good news is Barbados is not the only example. There are lots of other examples as well. I want, as part of the call to action, is to consider, because you are influential decision makers, is to think about the SDG summit that's coming up in New York in September. COP28 coming up in Dubai in early December. The G7 in Italy. Some of you represent G20 countries. There are possibilities, and I don't want us to underestimate our sphere of influence. We can't do this on our own, and I just want to say this. I know I'm stating the obvious, but it's good to be reminded sometimes. No single sector can find all the solutions needed to address the challenges I talked about. I'm sure the public sector would try, the private sector, and our sector as well, thinking sometimes that we have all the answers, and the bottom line is we don't. We have some of the answers, but not all the answers. So I would encourage us to consider stronger collaboration, stronger partnerships, just like what we heard over the past 2 days. And my colleague Amanda yesterday talked about our Home Equals campaign. I want to remind us that's just not a Habitat campaign. That's our campaign when it comes to how we look at informal settlements. We want you to be part of that journey. And the reason I use the term journey is Habitat itself is on a journey. We are not here today trying to tell everyone else that we got this right. To the contrary, what we want to tell you is that we are a learning organization that's keen to understand and appreciate the complexities, but more importantly, to co-create the solutions with each of you as well. So I want to close by saying, housing is just more than a social issue. And we have an obligation, friends. Conferences come and go. Conversations happen all the time. But we need to ask us, even as we leave this conference, what is it that we would do differently? And I just want to say one final thing in closing. I'm not sure if I exceeded my time quota or not, but I'm just going to take, since I have the mic, at least take 60 seconds to say this. Within Habitat for Humanity International, we have 3 core values that guide the work that we do. It's humility, courage, and accountability. And I'll tell you why it's just not internal for us. As to why we are trying, we are not perfect, we are trying our level best to model what that means when it comes to our partnerships, our interventions, etc. Humility tells us that we don't have all the answers. We need each other. We need to have that posture. Courage tells us that we need to learn to speak out. For us, Home Equals is an example, but not the only example, to say we need to elevate our voices. We are privileged that we have a voice. Our communities, those who are adversely impacted, expect us to elevate our voice. That's what courage is all about. But accountability is just not an internal-facing thing. It's about, I would actually invite you to hold us to account based on the statements that we make, the pronouncements that we make, the interventions that we commit to. But may I also courageously say that we should do that to each other as well. So once again, thank you so much. Muchas gracias. I really appreciate all what you do. And like I said, the next time I'll try and get better at my Spanish. Thank you.